A billionaire's daughter was dying slowly, behind a door the public was never allowed to see through. A rare condition was turning the little girl's own body against itself, devouring her red blood cells faster than her marrow could make them, and only a very specific kind of blood could keep her alive. Not just a type plus a missing piece that almost nobody in the region carried, less than one person in 1,000. For 2 years, 24 months, without a single missed appointment, one woman walked into the same hospital, rolled up her sleeve, gave a pint of herself away for free, and then walked back to her real job, mopping floors, emptying biohazard bins, scrubbing the worst nights of strangers' lives off the linoleum 3 corridors down from the very child she was keeping alive. She had no idea whose veins her blood was running into. She had no idea that the small, dark-haired girl on the locked wing upstairs, the daughter of a man whose face she had scrolled past 100 times without stopping, was breathing because of her. And the billionaire, a man who could put a senator on the phone in 4 minutes and move $100 million before lunch, had no idea that the only thing keeping his daughter alive was a janitor he had walked past in his own hallways and never once thought to look at. Then one rainy Thursday night, he found out. He found out all of it at once, and the woman who had been saving his child for 2 years was right there in front of him, on her hands and knees, scrubbing a long streak of blood off the floor outside a 3rd-floor bathroom for $16 an hour. What he did in the days after that would either rebuild a family or tear the cover off an ugly thing that powerful men spend a lot of money not having to look at. But before any of that, before the rainy night, before the man in the doorway, before the lawyers and the headlines, there was somebody else moving quietly in the dark of that building. Somebody who had decided, long before this story started, that the people who held the whole place together with their bare hands were exactly the people he could squeeze the hardest, because nobody important was ever going to come looking for them. He was wrong about that. Stay with me, because the child receiving this woman's blood right now is going to grow up to know her name, and the man squeezing those workers in the dark is going to learn that the cheapest, most invisible woman in his building was the most dangerous person to ever cross him. Her name was Yvette Sumter. Everybody who loved her, which was a short list, called her Vet. 37 years old, environmental services technician, on the night shift at St. Bridget's Children's Hospital in West Philadelphia, 7 at night to 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week, 6 when the rent did its yearly climb and the math stopped working. She rented the back half of a row house on a narrow street in Mantua, 10 minutes from the hospital on a good bus night, and 40 on a bad one. She drove a 2009 Corolla with 211,000 miles on it and a back seat full of compression socks and bottled water. She owed $19,000 on student loans for a degree she had never finished, and she paid it down $40 at a time, like a woman bailing water out of a boat with a coffee cup. She did not look like much to the people who passed her. That was sort of the point of the uniform. But here is the thing the people who passed her never knew. Once a month, on the same Tuesday, before she clocked in, Yvette walked down a corridor most patients didn't know existed, past the chapel and the vending machines that never got refilled, into the hospital blood bank. She sat down in the donor chair the way other women sat down in a barber's chair. Easy, familiar, like giving away a piece of herself was as ordinary as buttoning her coat. The night tech, a soft-spoken man named Errol, who had worked that counter for 19 years, tied the band around her arm and tapped twice for the vein. "You know how rare you are," he said. It was not a question. He said some version of it every month, AB negative, and you're missing that one little antigen on top of it. We type maybe 2 donors a year in this whole city who can do what your blood does. One of them 70, the other moved to Charlotte. He shook his head. You're a hospital walking around in a mop uniform. Yvette watched the needle go in, watched the dark line of herself climb the tubing and spill slow into the bag. She never looked away. She had given blood the first time at 15, and her grandmother had told her to keep her eyes open. Always look. Never be ashamed of what your own body can do. You ever wonder where it goes? Errol asked. Whose veins? We can't tell you. Even I don't know. Most of the time, it gets typed, screened, crossed, shipped. Could be a soldier, could be a baby up in the NICU, could be somebody you stand next to on the L tomorrow and never know it. I don't need to know, Yvette said. My grandmother used to say blood doesn't check your bank account before it saves somebody. It just goes where it's sent. She said it the way you say a thing you've said your whole life. No performance in it. Just an old, true sentence, worn smooth. Errol sealed the bag, labeled it with a barcode that meant nothing to her, and slid it into the cooler with 3 others. Inside of 2 days, what was in that bag would be inside another human being. Anonymous, untraceable. One person gives, another receives, and the 2 of them go their whole lives without ever learning. The other one drew breath. He handed her a juice box and a packet of cheese crackers. She took both, because she had learned a long time ago you never turn down free food. Then she went to work. Nobody on the cleaning crew knew she did this. Nobody in her building knew. There was no money in it, no write-off, no plaque on a wall. There was a juice box and a sentence from a dead, tired woman to herself in the dark, and that was the entire transaction, as far as she understood it. But if she had known whose body her blood kept finding, every single thing about the next 2 years would have gone a different way. Stay close, because 4 floors above the room where Yvette Sumpter gave her blood away for free, there was a child whose last name was on the side of half the buildings in this city. Her official title was Environmental Services Technician. In plain English, she was a janitor, the lowest rung on a tall ladder, and she made $16.40 an hour. That sounded like more than minimum wage until you tried to live on it in Philadelphia. After taxes, after the health plan, after the dues Meridian took out before she ever saw the check, her take-home was about $2,200 a month. Her half of the row house ran $1,400 of that before she opened a can of beans. The work was simple on paper. Strip the soiled linens, mop the blood and the bile and the things that don't have a polite name off the floor, restock the soap, empty the sharps, wipe down the crib rails in the oncology wing, clean the playroom toys with a solution so strong it dissolved the painted faces off the dolls in a month. An EVS tech is the person who walks into the worst room in the building at the worst minute of a family's life and removes the evidence, so the next family doesn't have to see what the last one saw. And she was invisible, not in a poem. Literally, doctors stepped around her like she was a folded chair somebody left in the hall. Nurses gave her instructions sideways, without looking up from a tablet. Once a father had complained to a nurse about the cleaning lady being in the room while Yvette was standing 4 feet from him, close enough to hear his daughter's heart monitor, because he had decided she could not understand English and would not care if she could. She was background, a pair of gloved hands and a cart, an interruption. At most, the man who ran the cleaning crews was not a hospital employee at all. That was the part most people never understood. St. Bridget's did not hire its own janitors. It hired a company. The company was called Meridian Facility Solutions, and the man who ran the Meridian account at 3 hospitals across the city was named Roland Keck. Keck wore a grey suit that fit him a little too well, and shoes that had never been near a mop bucket. He showed up at the hospital 2 or 3 nights a week, always after the administrators went home, walking the floors with a tablet, checking time cards against camera footage. He smiled a lot. That was the thing people remembered about Roland Keck. He smiled while he took things from you. Yvette. He said her name the first night of this story like it tasted good. Walk with me a second. He had pulled up the footage from 3 nights earlier. The camera in the hallway outside room 6 had caught her sitting on the edge of a child's bed for 4 minutes. The child had been 6 years old, alone at 2 in the morning, sobbing because she couldn't find her stuffed rabbit. Yvette had found it under the bed, given it back, and stayed long enough to make sure the girl could breathe without choking. 4 minutes, Keck said, tapping the screen, still smiling. You've got 19 rooms a night. You sit 4 minutes on one. That's 4 minutes the contract's paying for that the contract didn't buy. You follow me? She was scared. They're all scared, sweetheart. It's a children's hospital. He slid a paper across the cart. A write-up. There's nurses for the scared part. Chaplains. Whole department of people the contract does pay to sit on beds. You're not one of them. Sign it. She signed it. She did not argue. She had learned, a long time ago, that arguing with the man who controlled your paycheck was a luxury she could not afford. Not when her grandmother was 26 miles away, in a rented duplex in Chester, losing her body one organ at a time. Airline Sumpter was 74, congestive heart failure, the third stage, with the kidneys starting to follow, and the early shadow of dementia coming in at the edges like fog at the bottom of a window. She was the only mother Yvette had ever known. Yvette's mother had died bringing her into the world, and Airline had raised her on a school cafeteria salary and a vegetable garden and a church that fed people on Sundays, whether they tithed or not. Airline needed 3 medicines that ran over $600 a month, even with the discount card. She needed a home aide 3 days a week, and the agency billed $29 an hour. She needed somebody to drive her to the cardiologist twice a month, which Yvette did, even when it meant working the night before and signing the intake forms with her eyes half shut. Yvette never told a soul at the hospital about any of it, never complained, never asked for a thing. She clocked in, did the job, gave her blood once a month, clocked out. Every morning when her shift ended, she crossed the street to the bus shelter, and on the side of it was the same ad that had been there for a year. A glass tower going up downtown, all blue light and clean angles. Marsh Tower, the words read. A new heart for the city. Below it, smaller, built by Marsh Capital. Yvette walked past that ad every morning without giving it a second look. She did not know who the Marshes were beyond a name on a building. She did not follow that world. She did not have the hours. She did not know that the man behind the name had a daughter. She did not know the daughter was sick. She did not know the daughter was a patient inside the very building she had just walked out of. And she had no way of knowing that the small girl on the locked 4th floor wing, the one whose name was kept off the patient board for security, was being kept alive once a month by what Yvette gave away for the price of a juice box. 4 floors up, there was a world that smelled like cut flowers instead of bleach. The Halford Pediatric Specialty Suite was a wing of St. Bridget's that most of the hospital's own staff had never been allowed to walk through. You needed a special badge. You needed a background check. You needed to be cleared by hospital security and, for certain families, by a private detail that travelled with them. In Suite 412, a 7-year-old named Juniper Marsh, June to everyone who loved her, sat cross-legged on top of her bed, colouring a horse purple. A bag of dark red blood hung on the pole beside her, dripping slow into a line that ran to a port under her collarbone. She did not look up when the door opened. She had been in and out of this room so many times in her short life that a doctor walking in barely registered. Her father sat in the chair by the window. Gideon Marsh was 46 years old. He had built a company called Marsh Health out of a 1-bedroom apartment 15 years earlier. A piece of software that let small rural clinics share patient records they used to lose in fax machines, and he had sold a piece of it and bought pieces of other things until the number attached to his name had 9 zeros in it, and a magazine had put his face on a cover under the words, "The Man Rewiring American Medicine." He had a wife once. Her name was Diane. She had died of an aneurysm 3 years ago, in a kitchen in their house in Gladwin with no warning at all. Between pouring 2 cups of coffee, and Gideon had learned in one afternoon that there were some problems you could not buy your way out of. He had thought, before that day, that there were no such problems. He had spent the 3 years since learning the same lesson over and over in this room, because June was dying, slowly, and he could not buy the thing that would stop it. She had been diagnosed at 4 with warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. ICD code D5911, a number Gideon could recite in his sleep. Her own immune system mistook her red blood cells for invaders and tore them apart. Most months it was slow, manageable, but it never stopped, and somewhere along the way her body had done a second cruel thing. It had built an antibody to a common blood antigen, which meant that ordinary compatible blood was no longer compatible. She needed blood that was AB negative and also missing that one specific antigen matched. The blood bank had a phrase for the units they could find for her on a bad month. Least incompatible. A phrase no parent should ever have to hear about their child. Dr. Soraya Massoud walked in with her tablet, chief of pediatric hematology, trained at Penn, born in Tehran, the kind of doctor who had stopped being impressed by famous parents 2 decades ago. Numbers are climbing, she said, glancing at the monitor. She'll be back in safe range by morning. Gideon leaned forward. Soraya, I'm going to ask you the thing again. I know what you're going to ask. Who gives her this blood? The same donor, every month, on time. Who is it? You know I can't tell you. My daughter is alive because of a stranger I can't thank, can't protect, can't even guarantee will come back next month. What if they stop? What if they move? What's the plan, Soraya? If the one person on earth who matches my child decides one Tuesday they're tired. That is exactly the situation, Mr. Marsh, she said quietly. And it is the situation for every rare patient in this country whose name isn't on a building. Donor anonymity isn't a courtesy. It's a federal protection. The minute powerful people get to learn who their donors are, donors get pressured, followed, bought, and then they stop giving. And the children who die first are the ones whose fathers can't put a doctor on the phone at midnight. She softened. A fraction. Anonymity is the only reason this person gives freely. The day you know them, the gift changes shape. Gideon looked at his daughter. June had given the horse a yellow mane now and was starting on the tail. Can you tell me one thing, he said. Is it the same person, every month? Dr. Massoud looked at the tablet. She looked at the child. She made a small choice she would think about for a long time afterward. The same person, she said. 24 months. Not one missed donation. Gideon sat very still after she left. 24 months. A stranger had been the difference between his daughter living and dying for 2 years, and he did not know if it was a man or a woman, young or old, near or far. He made his daughter a promise he did not say out loud. Someday, I will find you, and I will make sure you never have to worry about a single thing again. He had no idea how stupid that promise was going to sound the day he actually met her, and he had no idea that the woman in question was, at that exact moment, 4 floors below him, being told by a man in a grey suit that if she sat on one more child's bed, she was finished. It was a Tuesday, 2 minutes past midnight, in that strange dead hour when a hospital finally goes quiet. Yvette pushed her cart down the 4th floor hallway, the locked wing. She had only been cleared to clean it for a few weeks, ever since the regular tech went out on a hip. The badge on her chest had a small red dot in the corner that meant she had passed the extra background check for the high-security suites. She had never asked why the wing needed one. It was not her business, and asking questions was another thing she couldn't afford. Room by room, wipe the surfaces, mop, restock the gloves, check the sharps, swap the linen bag, move on. She could do it in her sleep, and on a bad night she nearly did. Suite 412 was next. She knocked once. Nothing. She knocked again. A small voice on the other side said, "It's open." She pushed the door in slow. The room was dim, lit by a little lamp shaped like a crescent moon. In the bed, a small girl sat up against 2 pillows, very much awake, knees hugged to her chest, a slept-on braid coming loose on one side. Her eyes were huge and tired and lonely in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Hi, baby." Yvette kept her voice low. "I'm just here to clean. I can come back. You all right in here?" The girl shook her head. "Don't go. Daddy had a thing tonight. He's coming in the morning." A pause. "I don't like the dark, and the machine makes a noise like it's mad at me." Yvette looked at the cart. She looked at her watch. 15 rooms left before sunrise. Keck checked the camera footage. He had told her, with a smile, what the next bed would cost her. She walked into the room anyway. She parked the cart in the doorway so the hall light fell across the floor, and she sat down in the chair beside the bed. "What's your name, sugar?" Juniper. Everybody calls me June. Well, June, I'm Miss Yvette. I'll sit with you a little while, just till you get sleepy. That work? June nodded. So hard. The braids swung. Then she lay back, pulled the blanket to her chin, and turned her whole body toward Yvette like she was trying to soak in another person through her skin. Yvette started talking, low and easy, about her grandmother's porch in South Carolina before the family came north, about the way lightning bugs came up out of the grass when the sky went that deep blue that isn't quite black yet, about a wren that built a nest over the kitchen window every spring, even though somebody always knocked it down by July, and how it just kept coming back like it had never heard of giving up. June's eyes got heavy, her grip on the blanket loosened, and right before she went under, she reached under her pillow and pulled out a folded square of red construction paper, opening it careful, like it was made of glass. "This is the blood angel," she whispered, holding it up. It was a crayon drawing, a figure with brown skin and a gold halo, holding something that might have been a heart and might have been a bag with a little smiling face drawn on it. The kind of thing only a 7-year-old can make and mean with her whole chest. "Who's the blood angel, June? Somebody gives me their blood every month so I don't die. Daddy says we don't know who they are, but I know." Her voice was going soft and slow. "I know they're an angel. I keep the picture under my pillow so they can feel that I love them. Even though we never met." Yvette went very still. Something warm and aching opened up in her chest, and she could not have told you why. She did not connect the drawing to the dark red bag, dripping quietly into the pole in the corner. Why would she? She was the woman who cleaned the floor. The blood angel was somebody else, somebody far away and important. That was how it worked. "I'm sure they know, baby," she said. "I'm sure they love you right back." June smiled in her sleep. Inside of a minute, her breathing went long and even. Yvette tucked the blanket up around her shoulders, set the drawing on the nightstand where the child could find it, and pushed her cart back into the hall. She had no idea she had just sung to sleep, the same child she had been keeping alive for 24 straight months. She had no idea that in 3 weeks the whole city was going to find out. Yvette Sumter had not always been a janitor, not in the story she carried around inside her chest. She had been a nurse, almost. 3 semesters from a Bachelor of Science in nursing at Temple, top of her clinical group. She had an acceptance letter for a residency at a children's unit folded in a drawer at home, under a stack of expired car insurance and a few parking tickets she'd never fought. She still couldn't throw it out. 11 years and she still couldn't. She had wanted to be the nurse who held the line steady so the toddler didn't panic. The one who told the scared parents their baby was going to be all right in words they could actually understand. She had a way with children. Everybody said so. Her professors, her clinical instructors, strangers in the cereal aisle, whose crying babies went quiet. The second Yvette pulled a face from across the store. The fall of her senior year, Erline had a stroke, not the kind that takes you in an instant, the slow kind, the kind that whittles a person down a piece at a time. And the woman who had raised Yvette from a baby could no longer be left alone. Yvette sat on her dorm floor at 2 in the morning with a calculator and a legal pad, running the numbers over and over the way every black woman in this country who has ever had to choose between her own future and her family has run them, hoping they'd come out different. They didn't. Tuition, books, rent on her grandmother's place, Earline's medicine, Earline's aid, Earline's electric bill. Because Earline had started forgetting to pay it, there was not enough for school and her grandmother both. Not close. She withdrew on a humid Wednesday in August. Her advisor cried. Yvette didn't. She'd already done her crying alone in the car the week before. She got her nursing assistant license in 8 weeks because it was the fastest credential a hospital would take, then traded up to the environmental services certification because it paid $2 more an hour, and $2 an hour across a year was the gap between making rent and not. She told herself it was temporary. A year, maybe 2. That was 11 years ago. Some women would have gone bitter. Yvette didn't. Not because she didn't feel it. She felt it every night she walked in wearing the grey uniform instead of scrubs. She felt it every time a nurse snapped an order without looking up. Every time she stood in a room and listened to a doctor explain a diagnosis badly to a terrified family, knowing she could have explained it so they'd actually understand. But Airline had given her something at 12 years old that kept the bitterness from putting down roots. The year after Yvette's grandfather died, Airline had taken her to a blood drive in the basement of the AME church. Yvette had been scared of the needle. Airline held her hand the whole time and said the thing Yvette would carry the rest of her life. Baby, your blood doesn't know if you're rich or poor, doesn't know your name, doesn't know your color, doesn't care if you finish school. It just knows how to keep somebody breathing. That's the most honest thing about you. When you give it, you're giving the realest part of yourself, and you're giving it without asking for one thing back. Yvette had never stopped. Not through 2 jobs, not through 4-hour nights, not when her own iron dropped so low she had to choke down liver and spinach for a month to come back up. She had given up the dream of the scrubs. She had never once given up the heart underneath them. She practiced nursing in every room she cleaned, with every scared child she sat with in the dark, every month with every pint she let them draw out of her arm. The only person on the crew who seemed to actually see her was a 20-year-old named Deshawn Ellery. Deshawn worked nights to pay for 2 classes at the community college, chasing a respiratory therapy certificate 1 semester at a time. He pushed his cart fast and clean, and he called Yvette Miss Vet and asked her questions about the body, about lungs, about what the machines did, because she knew and because she answered him like the questions were worth answering. You should be teaching this, he told her one night, 3 weeks before everything cracked open, while they restocked a supply closet on the 2nd floor. For real, you know more than half these nurses. I know enough to mop, she said. Nah, he shook his head. You know enough to be somebody. You just got handed a bad deck. Yvette laughed. Boy, finish your flashcards. He did, but he was right, and they both knew it. And 3 weeks later, the bad deck was going to get a great deal worse before anybody got dealt a single good card. Roland Keck did not get rich on a children's hospital cleaning contract by paying people what the contract said they were owed. Here is how it actually worked, and none of it is invented, because versions of it run in hospitals and nursing homes and warehouses all over this country right now. Meridian billed St. Bridget's for a full crew at a set rate. Then Keck ran the crew short. He shaved minutes off time cards at the edges, 4 here, 6 there, where the cameras gave him cover. He rounded overtime down to nothing. He kept 2 names on the payroll that belonged to nobody, ghost workers, whose checks went to an account he controlled. He leaned hardest on the people least likely to make noise, the ones with a sick parent, the ones a paycheck behind on rent, the ones who couldn't afford a week without work to fight him, and who he had figured out, correctly, that no important person was ever going to come asking about. Yvette had noticed her checks running light for months. 4 hours, 1 pay period, 6 the next. She had brought it to him once, politely, with a printout. Keck had smiled and said the system must have a glitch, and he'd look into it. And the next pay period it happened again, and she understood. She understood the way you understand weather. You don't argue with it. You bring a coat. But that spring something changed, and it changed because of her. A reporter from a local non-profit newsroom had started calling around about subcontracted hospital workers and unpaid wages. Somebody had filed a complaint with the state. Keck didn't know who, and it made him jumpy. And a jumpy man with a scheme to protect starts looking for the loose board in his own floor. He found Yvette. He pulled her time cards. And he found something that didn't fit. Once a month, the same Tuesday, there was a 40-minute gap before her shift, where her badge pinged the blood bank corridor on the security log. He didn't know what she was doing down there. He assumed the worst, because men like Keck always assume the worst, because it's what they'd be doing. You're moonlighting, he said, cornering her by the linen chute one night, voice low and friendly as ever, down in the blood bank, selling plasma on the side, running something. Your badge is all over that corridor. I donate, Yvette said. On my own time. Before I clock in. On hospital property. In a Meridian uniform. He let that sit. That's a liability. Could be a termination. Somebody wanted to read the handbook hard enough. The smile again. But I'm not somebody who wants to read it hard. Long as we understand each other, you keep your head down. You don't talk to anybody asking questions about hours, about checks, about me. You had nothing to complain about, right? Yvette looked at him for a long second. Right, she said. It cost her something to say it. He heard the cost, and he liked it, and he walked off whistling, and he cut her the next week down to 4 nights, which knocked $200 off a check that already didn't cover her grandmother's aid. That was the antagonist of this story. Not a monster. A man in a good suit who had decided, somewhere along the way, that the people who held the whole building together with their hands were a resource he was entitled to skim, and that the smile would keep anybody from looking too close. He was about to find out who he'd been smiling at. 2 floors up, and a world away, Gideon Marsh was making his own ugly choice. He had gone home from the hospital and he had not slept, and somewhere around 4 in the morning the helplessness in him had curdled into the thing it always curdled into. A plan, a lever. He was a man who solved problems by finding the pressure point and leaning on it, and he had decided he was done being told no by a doctor. He came to Dr. Masood's office before the lights were fully on, holding a coffee he never drank. I need the donor's name, he said. I'm not going to harass them. I'm going to take care of them. I want to know my daughter's blood supply isn't one tired Tuesday away from ending. You know I can't, Mr. Marsh. My daughter almost crashed last month. You told me yourself the regional supply of her type is a handful of units in a good week. And you're telling me there's one person in this city keeping her alive, and I'm not allowed to know their name. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Gideon set the coffee down. He went to the window, came back, and then he did the thing he would be ashamed of for the rest of his life. Marsh Capital has been in conversations to fund the new pediatric research wing, $18 million, with my name optional. I can make that happen this quarter, or I can find out, very publicly, that I have lost confidence in how this hospital is run, and I can take $18 million and a great deal of attention somewhere else. He said it evenly, the way he'd said worse to better defended people. I'd like the name. Dr. Masood looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Marsh, she said quietly, if I sell you a donor's identity for $18 million, what is this hospital? It's a place where money buys access to anyone's private medical records, as long as the right last name is the patient. That's not a hospital, that's a store. And if that's what you want it to be, then you're not the man your wife told me you were. The year she sat in that chair waiting for your daughter's first transfusion, and told me you were the most decent person she'd ever met. Gideon stood very still. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years, maybe since Diane. He picked up his coffee. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. That was beneath me, he said, not turning around. Yes, she said. It was. He left without another word. He could not buy the name. He could not subpoena it. And so the universe handed it to him, the way it usually does. By accident. On a rainy Thursday, 3 days later, but not before it nearly took June 1st. It was a Friday, 10 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, and on the 4th floor something was going badly wrong. June had been fine that morning. Half a bowl of oatmeal, a new colouring page, a unicorn this time. By 11 she was tired. By noon she was pale. By 1 her lips had gone faintly grey, and the nanny who knew what that meant hit the call button so hard she bruised her thumb. By 1:15 the rapid response team was in the room. By 1:30 Dr. Masood stood at the foot of the bed, reading numbers off a monitor, with a face that did not move at all, which was the way her face moved when she was very afraid. She's in active hemolytic crisis, she said, half into a phone, half to Gideon, who had come straight from a board meeting still in the suit. Her body's tearing through cells faster than I've seen all year. Hemoglobin's 5.1 and dropping. We don't transfuse in the next few hours. We're looking at her brain, and her heart starting to starve. Then transfuse her. Use whatever you have. We don't have it, Gideon. 4 words. They landed like a fist. What do you mean you don't have it? Find it. Call every hospital in the state. We have. Her antibody means she needs antigen-matched units. AB negative is rare. Antigen matched on top of it is almost nothing. The regional supply's been critically low for 6 weeks. There's 1 matched unit in Pittsburgh, and it's already cross-matched to a trauma patient who came in this morning. They will not release it, and I would not, in their shoes. Then I'll call the White House, the Pentagon. They have reserves. They have common reserves. Nobody stockpiles what she needs, Gideon, because nobody can. There is no shelf-stable substitute for this. The only matched blood on Earth right now is inside the bodies of people who haven't given it yet, or in a directed donor we cannot reach in time. Gideon Marsh, who had built an empire out of refusing to accept that any problem was unsolvable, gripped the bed rail with both hands to keep his knees under him. There's some problem money fixes, he said. There has to be. This is not one of them. Dr. Massoud's voice cracked, just slightly. The only thing that fixes this is a person with the exact right blood, walking into that donor chair in the next 2 hours and laying down their arm. That's it. That's the whole list. She glanced at her tablet, at the donor record open on the screen. The same name, the same woman, 24 months. She closed her mouth before she said it. She would think about that silence for the rest of her career, because it very nearly killed June Marsh. And 4 floors down, restocking a supply room on the 2nd floor, a woman in a grey uniform was about to overhear 2 surgical nurses say a child's name in the hall and decide to do something her own body had no business doing. It was 10 minutes to 4 when Yvette Sumter overheard it. 2 surgical nurses came around the corner, talking low and fast, the way hospital people talk when something is sliding sideways. The Marsh kid on 4, 7 years old. Active crisis. They've called everybody. There's nothing matched in the region. If they don't find it by tonight, they're going to try and exchange with the least incompatible units and pray she holds. In a kid that size, that's a coin flip. I know. They turned the corner and were gone. They never saw the woman standing 6 feet away with an armful of paper towel rolls. Yvette set the rolls down on the cart. Slow. The way you set something down when you aren't sure your hands can be trusted. AB negative. Antigen matched. The Marsh kid. She had given blood 11 days ago. The interval between whole blood donations was 56 days. 11 was not even close. Her iron had been low for weeks. She'd been dragging herself through shifts on coffee and stubbornness. She knew, better than almost anyone in that building, exactly what it would cost her body to give again this soon. She could faint, she could crash, she could end up in a bed of her own, which would mean nobody drove airline to dialysis on Monday. She knew every word of every pamphlet in that donation room. She had read them a dozen times. She also knew that 4 floors up there was a child she had never officially met, a girl with a slept-on braid who kept a crayon angel under her pillow so a stranger could feel that she was loved. And she knew that the only thing standing between that child and a coffin was a woman who carried, in her own veins, the one thing almost nobody else in this city had. She walked fast to the blood bank. Errol looked up when she came through the door, and his face fell the second he recognized her. Yvette. No, it's way too soon, and you know it's too soon. I know. I can't draw you. It's against protocol. I could lose 19 years. Then call somebody who can override it. There's a child on the 4th floor about to die, and I'm not getting out of this chair until somebody takes what I've got. She rolled up her sleeve. I'll sit here all night. Page who you have to page. Errol stared at her. Then he picked up the phone and paged Dr. Massoud. She came down in under 3 minutes. She walked into the blood bank, saw the janitor sitting in the donor chair with her sleeve already up, and something behind her eyes broke open. Because she knew exactly whose blood this was about to save. She knew the child 4 floors up. She knew the drawing under the pillow. She knew the woman in faded grey in front of her had been doing this every month for 2 years without the faintest idea whose life she was holding in her own arm. She wanted, more than she had wanted anything in a long time, to tell her, right there, with the needle still in its wrapper. She didn't. She did the doctor thing instead. She examined her, checked her iron, her pressure, her color. She did the math out loud, the real math, the risk. She authorized it as a medical exception, under direct physician supervision, with monitoring, because that was the only honest way to do a thing this far outside the rules, and she wrote down every reason in case anyone ever asked. "You understand what you're risking," she said. "I understand it, and you want to do it anyway." "I need to." Dr. Masood nodded once. The needle went in. Yvette's blood, dark and warm and carrying the one set of markers that matched a small girl 4 floors above her, began to fill the bag. She closed her eyes. Her grandmother's voice moved through her like a second pulse. "Your blood doesn't know if you're rich or poor. It just goes where it's sent." Dr. Masood carried the bag herself. She did not trust a courier with it, did not trust the tube. She walked it up 4 flights because the elevator was running slow, and she came into suite 412 with it still warm in her 2 hands. Gideon was at the bedside, holding his daughter's small hand, watching the wrong number on the monitor. He had not eaten. He had silenced his phone an hour before and shoved it under a stack of magazines. The richest man in the building was, for the second time in his life, completely powerless. Dr. Masood hung the bag, connected the line, started the drip. She did not say where it came from. She did not say how. She said, "We have what she needs. She's going to be all right." Gideon pressed his forehead to his daughter's hand and made a sound that was not quite a sob. Relief so big, it had not found its language yet. 4 floors below, Yvette lay back in the recovery chair. The room turned in slow circles. Her arms felt full of wet sand. Errol handed her a juice box and 2 graham crackers and told her, sternly, not to move for 45 minutes, and for once she did not argue. She did not know that her blood, at that exact moment, was pulling a 7-year-old back from an edge nobody had thought she could be pulled back from. She did not know that the drawing of the blood angel was sitting on a nightstand 8 feet from the bag with her own barcode on it. She just lay there, dizzy and quietly certain she had done the right thing, and after a while she got up, washed her face, and went back to her cart, because she still had 15 rooms to turn before sunrise, and Roland Keck was checking the cameras. The rainy Thursday came 3 days later. Gideon had taken to staying overnight in June's room when his schedule allowed, sleeping badly in the leather chair, because he had learned that the helplessness was worse at home, where there was nothing to watch but the ceiling. That Thursday he came in late, after a dinner he couldn't remember eating, and he got off the elevator on the 3rd floor by mistake. He was tired and reading something on his phone, and he'd walked 20 feet down the wrong corridor before he realized the room numbers were off. He turned to go back, and he saw a woman on her hands and knees outside the 3rd floor bathroom, scrubbing a long streak of blood and worse off the linoleum with a brush and a bottle of disinfectant. He slowed. He couldn't have said why. Maybe because the hall was so quiet. Maybe because of the way she was working, with a focused, unhurried care, the kind you don't see at almost midnight when nobody important is watching. She wore the grey Meridian uniform. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands were inside thin blue gloves that didn't quite hide the cracked skin underneath. A nurse came around the far corner and called out, "Yvette, Dr. Masood was looking for you. Said something about checking your iron before you clock out. Wants you in the blood bank." The woman on the floor looked up. "Tell her I'll be there." Yvette. Gideon stood very still. He did not move for almost a full minute. He watched her go back to scrubbing. He watched her hands. The small, methodical way she worked, like every square inch of that floor, was personally hers to make right. And somewhere in his chest, a piece of information he had not been hunting for dropped into place. Dr. Masood had said something to him 3 days earlier, in passing, the morning he'd threatened her, with $18 million. She'd said it almost to herself, looking at her tablet. She's in this building right now. You've walked past her. He had assumed she meant it as a kind of rebuke, a figure of speech. She had not. Gideon Marsh stood in a third-floor corridor at 11:40 at night, in a coat that cost more than the woman in front of him made in 2 months, and he understood with a clarity that made him physically dizzy. He had walked past her, in elevators, in hallways, outside his own daughter's room. He and his detail and his assistant had walked past her a dozen times, and not one of them had ever turned a head. The man whose company was rewiring American medicine had been refusing to see the single most important person in his daughter's medical life for 2 solid years. He did not approach her. He did not say a word. He turned around, rode the elevator down, and sat in his car in the parking garage for 45 minutes before he trusted himself to drive. He had found the name he was not allowed to have. He had no idea that, at that very moment, a man in a grey suit 2 floors up was opening a folder on his tablet labelled with that same name and beginning, very carefully, to build the case that would get her fired. Roland Keck had a problem, and his problem was that the reporter had not stopped calling. The non-profit newsroom had filed a public records request. The State Department of Labor had opened a file, and Keck, who had spent years assuming nobody would ever look, had started to feel the air change. He needed 2 things. He needed the loose boards nailed down, and he needed a story ready about why anybody who talked was unreliable. The loose board, in his mind, was Yvette Sumter. She knew her checks ran light. She had brought him a printout once. She had badged the blood bank corridor at hours he couldn't explain on a form. And worst of all, in the last week, a name had started moving through the hospital that made his stomach turn, because a hospital is a small town, and small towns leak. A nurse had told an aide who had told a tech that the donor who'd saved the Marsh girl in the crisis was somebody on staff, somebody low, and Keck, who watched everything, had put it together about 10 minutes before Gideon did. The woman keeping a billionaire's daughter alive worked for him for $16 an hour, while he skimmed her checks. If that got told the right way, Keck looked like a villain. If it got told his way, first, loud, and early, Yvette looked like a problem, and he looked like the manager who caught her. So he built a file. He pulled every camera frame of her sitting on a child's bed and called it abandoning assigned duties. He flagged the blood bank gaps and called it unauthorized activity on the clock, even though it was always before her shift, because a form doesn't argue back. And then he did the thing that men like Keck always have in their back pocket. He had a supply log altered to show missing inventory: gauze, saline, disinfectant. The exact items a thief, or a nurse, or a woman patching a child up might take. He wrote up a complaint alleging theft of hospital property and misuse of a security badge in a restricted wing, and he filed it with hospital administration and with the contractor's HR at the same time, certified, time-stamped, airtight, on a Monday morning at 6:50. Just as Yvette was clocking out from a double, her phone rang, a number she didn't know. "Miss Sumter, this is Carol from Meridian HR. I'm sorry to call so early." Yvette stood in the parking garage with her keys in her hand and felt her body go cold. "Miss Sumter, effective immediately, you're placed on unpaid suspension pending investigation. A complaint's been filed alleging theft of hospital supplies and unauthorized access to a restricted unit. There's documentation. We've notified the hospital, and we're required to ask you to stay off the property until it's resolved." The garage tilted, just slightly. "Carol, who filed it? I'm not able to discuss that during an active investigation." "Carol, who filed it?" A pause. "It came through your regional director's office." "Of course it did." "Miss Sumter," Carol said, lower now, off whatever script she'd been reading. "Off the record, I've processed 100 of these. This one's too clean. Somebody built it. I can't say more than that. Get yourself somebody to talk to." The line went dead. Yvette sat down on the cold concrete curb in the parking garage with her career in her hand, and she did not, in that moment, cry. She thought about her grandmother 26 miles away, who needed a check on Monday for the aid, and a check on the 15th for the medicine, and a ride to dialysis the next morning that Yvette could no longer take time off to give, because she no longer had time off, because she no longer had a job. She thought about the child upstairs with the crayon angel, who she would now be arrested for trespassing if she went to see. She thought about the man in the grey suit, smiling, and she understood, sitting on that curb, that she had given a piece of her own body away to save that family 3 days before, and her reward was going to be ruin, and the man who built her ruin had counted on exactly one thing, that she was too small and too tired and too poor to fight, and that nobody who mattered would ever come asking. She drove home. She sat at her grandmother's kitchen table. She put her head down on her arms, finally, and let herself break for about 4 minutes. The same 4 minutes Keck had once written her up for spending on a frightened child. Then she got up, washed her face, and started calling legal aid, because a sumpter does not stay down on the floor, and she was very much a sumpter. She did not know that 2 miles away, a billionaire was already pulling a thread that was going to unravel the entire thing. Gideon Marsh did not sleep the night he learned her name, and he spent the next 3 days doing what he did best, which was not throwing money at a problem, but understanding it before he moved. He had Dr. Massoud, when he called to apologize, formally and completely, for the $18 million. She did not give him medical records, but she gave him this, carefully, within what she was allowed. Her name is Yvette Sumter, Environmental Services, night shift, almost 11 years here. She raises her grandmother, who has heart failure. She was a senior at Temple's nursing school 11 years ago, and withdrew for family. She has never once asked anyone in this hospital for a thing. She gives blood every month, and takes a juice box for it. That's what I can tell you. The rest, Mr. Marsh, you'll have to ask her, if she chooses to talk to you. He did not throw money. He went to look at how she was paid. He asked a simple question, the kind a man with his resources can get answered by morning. Who actually employs the woman saving my daughter's life? And the answer came back. Meridian Facility Solutions, a private contractor that staffed environmental services at 3 Philadelphia hospitals. He had his people pull Meridian, and that was when his stomach dropped through the floor, because Marsh Capital, his own venture fund, the one with his name on the door, held a position in a holding company that, 4 layers down through a private equity roll-up, owned a piece of Meridian Facility Solutions. His money, his fund, a line item he had never personally read, one of 200 positions, a managing director, had built into a diversified services basket 3 years earlier, was earning a return off of exactly the kind of operation that shaved hours off the checks of women like Yvette Sumter. He sat with that for a long time. He had stood in that hospital and threatened a doctor with $18 million to learn the name of the woman his own portfolio was quietly robbing. Then he did what he should have done from the beginning. He told his people to find out everything about how Meridian ran that account. Not the glossy version, the real one. Time cards, camera logs, payroll, the ghost names. He hired a forensic firm and a labor attorney named Patrice Okoli out of a small, fierce firm that had built its reputation taking apart exactly this kind of scheme, and he told them he didn't care what it cost or who it embarrassed, including him. Patrice Okoli called him back 4 days later. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I've seen a lot of wage theft. This is one of the cleaner schemes and one of the dirtier men. Roland Keck, regional director. He's been skimming time, ghosting payroll, and intimidating workers across 3 hospitals for at least 4 years." A pause. "And there's a fresh complaint in the file from this week. He just suspended a worker for theft and badge misuse. The documentation's fabricated, in my opinion, and I can probably prove it. The worker's name is Yvette Sumter." Gideon closed his eyes. "Miss Okoli," he said, "I want you to understand something before we go further. The woman he just suspended has been keeping my daughter alive for 2 years. He suspended her 3 days after she nearly killed herself donating blood to save her in an emergency. The line was quiet for a moment. "Well," Patrice Oakley said, "then let's take him apart properly." They took him apart on a Wednesday, in a glass conference room on the ground floor of St. Bridget's, and Roland Keck walked into that room smiling, because nobody had told him what it was about. He had been informed only that Marsh Capital, in its capacity as an indirect investor in Meridian's parent company, had requested a contract performance review and that the client's representatives would be present, along with hospital administration. Keck loved a review. A review was a stage. He had put on his best grey suit and practiced the part of the conscientious manager who ran a tight, clean account, and he came in shaking hands. There were more people in the room than he expected. Gideon Marsh sat at the head of the table, which Keck did not understand, because billionaires did not come to facilities reviews. Beside him sat a woman in a charcoal suit with a briefcase that looked like it had argued before judges who frightened other judges. The hospital's chief operating officer was there. A vice president from Meridian's own corporate office was there, looking pale, and in the corner, quiet, was Dr. Soraya Massoud, who had asked to attend, and whom no one had been willing to refuse. "Mr. Keck," Gideon said, "sit down. Thank you for coming." Keck sat. He smiled. "Always happy to walk the client through our numbers, Mr. Marsh. I think you'll find this account runs lean and clean." "Lean," Gideon said. "Yes, let's talk about lean." He nodded to the woman in the charcoal suit. "My name is Patrice Oakley," she said. "I represent Mr. Marsh. I'm going to walk this room through a series of facts, one at a time. And Mr. Keck, you're welcome to correct me whenever I'm wrong." She opened the briefcase. She took out the first document. Then she walked them through it, one page at a time. 40 minutes. The time cards, where minutes had been shaved at the edges in a pattern too regular to be error. The overtime rounded down to 0 across hundreds of shifts. The 2 payroll names that matched no human being who had ever badged into the building, whose checks routed to an account a forensic accountant had traced to Roland Keck. The intimidation, documented now in the sworn statements of 6 workers who had been afraid for years and had stopped being afraid the moment someone with a lawyer asked them the question. By minute 15, Keck had stopped smiling. By minute 25, the Meridian VP had slid his chair 6 inches away from Keck's, the way people move away from a thing that might be contagious. And then Patrice Oakley took out the last folder. "On Monday of this week," she said, "Mr. Keck filed a complaint against an environmental services worker. He alleged theft of hospital supplies and misuse of a security badge. He attached an altered inventory log to support it. I have the original log and the version he submitted, and a sworn statement from the supply tech who keeps it. The complaint is fabricated. He built it." She set both versions side by side on the table. He built it because the worker in question had badged the blood bank corridor at hours he couldn't explain, and because he'd begun to understand what she was actually doing down there. And what she was doing down there was a problem for him, because it was about to make him look very, very bad. "What was she doing down there?" the hospital COO asked. The room went quiet. Dr. Massoud spoke from the corner, for the first time, in the flat, careful voice of a person staying exactly inside the lines of what she was allowed to say. "For 24 months, she said, that worker has been the sole regular donor of a rare antigen-matched blood type to a critically ill child at this hospital. 11 days after her last donation, that child went into an acute crisis, and there was no compatible blood in the region. That worker donated again, against medical interval, at significant personal risk, under my supervision, and it saved the child's life. 3 days later, Mr. Keck suspended her without pay for theft." The COO turned and looked at Keck. Keck's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a second. Then the smile tried, weakly, to come back. "Now, I had no way of knowing. You suspended a woman for theft," Gideon Marsh said, and his voice was very quiet, which was worse than loud, "who you'd been robbing $4 at a time for years. You did it because she was the loose board in your floor. You did it because you assumed correctly that nobody who mattered would ever come asking about a janitor. He leaned forward. I am the somebody, Mr. Keck. The child she saved is my daughter, and I want you to understand, with total clarity, that the cheapest, most invisible woman on your crew turned out to be the most expensive mistake of your life. Keck looked around the room for an ally. There were none. The Meridian VP had moved his chair as far as it would go. He did not get a moment alone with anyone. He did not get to explain. He gathered his tablet and his good grey jacket, and he walked out of that glass room and across the lobby and out the front doors, and as far as anyone at St. Bridget's ever knew, he did not set foot in the building again. What followed him out the door took longer, the way real consequences always do. Within 30 days, the State Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division, which had already opened a file, subpoenaed Meridian's records for all 3 hospital accounts. Within 90 days, Meridian had lost the St. Bridget's contract entirely and was negotiating a settlement with the workers it had underpaid, a number that climbed past $2 million across 3 years and 240 employees. Within a year, Roland Keck was the named defendant in a criminal payroll fraud case, and a civil suit, and a story in the non-profit newsroom that the reporter had been chasing all along, which ran under a headline about the janitor who kept a billionaire's daughter alive while her boss stole from her checks. He did not go to prison for very long. In the end, wage theft rarely sends a man away the way it should, but he was finished. His name became a thing you could search, and what came up was the worst day of his life, attached forever to the best thing the woman he'd tried to destroy had ever done. Some justice is loud. Some is just the permanent public removal of a man's ability to ever smile his way into a room again. Yvette would have settled for either. She got both, but the conference room was business. The thing that mattered happened 2 days earlier, in the rain, on a curb, because Gideon Marsh did not wait for the meeting to find Yvette. He could not. He came on a Monday at 6 in the morning after he learned she'd been suspended, and he did the most reckless thing his chief of staff said he had ever done. He came without his detail. He came in jeans and a wool coat and a baseball cap, alone, and he stood outside the South Staff exit on the street and waited. It was raining, the cold kind that doesn't feel like anything until it's been on your shoulders 10 minutes. Yvette came out at 6:40, head down, jacket pulled tight, even though she had nowhere to be now, because the body keeps the habits the job carved into it. She was walking toward the bus shelter when a man in a baseball cap stepped off the curb and said her name. Yvette. She stopped. She turned. She looked at him, and her face moved through 3 things fast. Confusion, a flash of something like recognition, then the careful, flat neutrality she had built over years of strangers, knowing her name when she didn't know theirs. Can I help you? Do you know who I am? She studied him. The cap was low, but the jaw under it was the same jaw from the ad on the side of the bus shelter she had walked past every morning for a year. You're Marsh, she said. The building. I'm Gideon. May I have 10 minutes? I'll pay your cab home, the week's cabs, whatever you want. 10 minutes. She looked at the rain. She looked at him, alone. No aides, no cameras. She had nothing left to lose this week, and a part of her was almost curious what a man like this wanted with a woman like her. What's it about? My daughter. Yvette's face didn't change. I clean floors, Mr. Marsh. I don't know your daughter. You do. You don't know that you do, but you do. He stepped under the awning of the bus shelter, so they stood under the same small roof for the first time, out of the rain. My daughter is 7, he said. Her name is June. She has autoimmune hemolytic anemia, and for 2 years one person has given her the blood that keeps her alive, every month, anonymously, without missing once, including 11 days too soon, 3 weeks ago, when the hospital ran out and she was crashing, and somebody walked into that blood bank at 4 in the afternoon, and gave again even though it could have put them in a bed. He looked at her. It's you. You're the donor. Yvette had gone very still. I'm here, Gideon said, and his voice was not steady at all now, because I needed to look at you and say thank you. And because 3 days after you saved her, a man who works for a company my own money invests in suspended you for theft, and I'm going to spend whatever it takes to burn that to the ground. But mostly I'm here to say thank you and to tell you I'm sorry. For 2 years I walked past you and never once turned my head. The rain came down soft and steady on the awning. Yvette did not answer for almost a full minute. When she did, her voice was very quiet. Sweet, 412, she said. 4th floor, locked wing. Gideon nodded. Little girl with a braid. Asked me not to leave because the machine sounded mad at her. Yvette's eyes filled, but she did not let them fall. She had a drawing under her pillow, a blood angel. I sat with her 3 weeks ago. I told her about my grandmother's porch. I tucked her in. Her breath caught. That's June. That's your June. That's my June. I didn't know. It came out almost angry. The way grief comes out angry when it can't find the door. I would never have. I don't try to know. The whole point is you don't know. You just give it. And you never, I know, Gideon said. How did you find me? You were scrubbing the 3rd floor last Thursday. A nurse called your name, and I realized I'd been walking past you for 2 years and never seen you. Not once. Yvette took a small step back, not in anger, the way a person steps back when something enormous is being set down in front of them, and they need a little room to take it in. Mr. Marsh, she said, I don't want anything from you. I haven't offered you anything. You're about to. I can see it on your face. Please don't. I didn't give my blood for 2 years so that one day a rich man would write me a check. The minute I take money for it, it stops being the honest thing. It becomes a sale, and it never was. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. The rain kept falling. Then let me ask you something else, he said. Not as a man with money, as one person to another. Is there anything I can do for the people you love? Yvette opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She did not answer, but for the first time, she did not say no. He brought her up to the 4th floor the next afternoon. She had changed out of the grey uniform and put on the best thing she owned, a navy sweater her grandmother had given her 3 Christmases back, and she had ironed a pair of slacks twice that morning. She felt deeply wrong riding the elevator up past floors she had only ever cleaned. The badge on her chest was the same badge. The halls were the same halls, but she was walking through them as a guest now, and the strangeness of it sat heavy on her. Gideon opened the door to 412. June was sitting up in bed, eating cut strawberries from a bowl, a tablet propped on her knees. She looked up when the door opened, and her whole face came apart with joy. Miss Yvette, you came in the day. You never come in the day. Gideon stepped to the side. He wanted to watch this happen without being in the middle of it. Hey, Junebug, Yvette said, and her voice broke on it. How you feeling, baby? Better. Daddy says I had a bad week. But the blood angel came again. June paused. She looked at her father. She looked back at Yvette. Then she looked at the little drawing still propped on the nightstand, the brown-skinned figure with the gold halo. Then she looked at Yvette again, and her eyes went enormous. Are you the blood angel? Yvette could not get a word out. She nodded. You're the porch lady and the blood angel, June whispered, like a secret too big to hold. I'm just one person, Sugar. Yvette's voice was hardly there. I just do 2 things. June set the bowl of strawberries aside, very carefully, the way you set something down when you don't want to spill it. Then she opened both arms. Yvette crossed the room and gathered that small child against her chest and held her the way she'd held her grandmother through the worst nights of the stroke, tight, like she was giving every cell in her own tired body permission to finally rest. By the door, Gideon Marsh, who had been trained by money and by grief to keep his face under control in any room, found that his face was not under his control at all. He did not wipe it. He let it run. June whispered something against Yvette's shoulder. Yvette laughed, a soft broken sound, and whispered something back. Gideon could not hear what either of them said, and he understood, with a quiet shock, that he was not meant to. Yvette had said no to a check. She had not said no to help for the people she loved. And Gideon Marsh was a man who listened closely to exactly what people said and exactly what they didn't. So he did not write her a check. He did harder, quieter things instead, the kind that don't make a person feel bought. He learned, for the first time in his life, how the system actually worked for people who could not put a doctor on the phone at midnight. He had his foundation staff sit down and figure out, not the charity version, the real version, how a 74-year-old woman with heart failure in Chester, Pennsylvania, you could get a full-time home aide she did not have to choose between and her medicine. There was a Medicaid waiver Erline had qualified for the whole time and never been told about, buried under a process designed, it sometimes seemed, to make tired people give up. Gideon's people walked it through, not because anyone pulled a string for a billionaire, because for once, somebody with time and lawyers bothered to learn the path that already existed and was supposed to be open to her. Erline got her aid. 5 days, then 7. She got her medicine, without the monthly arithmetic of which pill to skip. And Yvette got reinstated at St. Bridget's inside of 2 weeks, on the hospital's payroll directly this time, after Meridian lost the contract. The fabricated complaint was withdrawn. The supply log was corrected. Carol from HR called personally to apologize, and Yvette thanked her and meant it. The new EVS manager, hired directly by the hospital, started everyone on the floor at $22 an hour, because the hospital had learned, expensively and in public, what it cost to look away from the people who held the building together. That was the part Yvette cared about more than her own check. There were 240 people on those 3 contracts. Every one of them got made whole. Every one of them got raised. Most of them never knew that it started because one of them couldn't stop herself from giving blood to a stranger. The Marsh Health Foundation, which had spent 15 years funding software and research, did one more thing that year. And it was Gideon's idea, and he built it himself instead of handing it to staff because he wanted every word of it to belong to him. He called it the Erline Sumter Fund. It paid full tuition, books, and a living stipend for any frontline hospital support worker, an EVS tech, a nursing assistant, a transporter, a food service worker, who wanted to go back to school for a nursing or allied health degree. No income cap, no age limit. The only requirement was that you had spent at least 3 years doing the invisible work, the work nobody put on a magazine cover, in an American hospital. He asked Yvette's permission to use the name. She did not exactly give it. She did not refuse it either. She just looked at the page for a long time and said she'd like that her name was finally doing what she always did, feeding people who weren't asking. The first person to use it was a 20-year-old named Deshawn Ellery. Deshawn had been chasing a respiratory therapy certificate 2 classes at a time for 2 years, working nights, never quite catching up to the cost. The fund covered the rest of it in one signature. He finished in a year. The night he passed his board exam, he came and found Yvette in the second-floor supply closet where she'd once told him he was somebody who'd been handed a bad deck, and he could not get a full sentence out, and she just hugged him and said, "I told you, finish your flashcards. He works the day shift now, with letters after his name, and he is, by every account, the kind of clinician who sits on the edge of a scared kid's bed for 4 minutes and dares anyone to write him up for it." 3 years later, Yvette Sumter walked across a stage in a white cap and gown at Temple University and received the degree she had set down at 26. She had not stopped at the bachelor's. She was already enrolled in the master's because she wanted to be a pediatric nurse practitioner, because she wanted to be the one who holds the line steady so the toddler doesn't panic. The dream had been sitting exactly where she left it. It had waited the whole 11 years, patient as that wren over the kitchen window, coming back every spring no matter who knocked it down. When the dean read her name, the auditorium did not just clap, it stood, because the people in that room knew. Her classmates knew, her professors knew, and a whole row of St. Bridget's staff who had come to watch one of their own cross the line from the lowest rung in the building to the letters R and N knew. In the 5th row, Three people sat together. June Marsh, 10 years old now, in remission, in the second grade. Her father had insisted she attend at a public school instead of the private one all the other rich kids went to, holding a small bunch of yellow daisies. Gideon Marsh, in a plain dark jacket, no detail, no entourage, just a man watching a woman receive a thing she had earned, with his hands folded so they would stay still. And beside them, in a wheelchair with a soft pink quilt over her knees, Earline Sumter, 78 now, forgetting more than she remembered on most days, the fog deeper at the edges of the window than it used to be. But on that morning, when her granddaughter's name came through the speakers, Earline Sumter sat up straight in that wheelchair and brought her hands together, slow and steady, and said in a voice that carried farther than anyone expected, "That's my baby. That's my baby right there." Yvette heard her over the applause. She knew she heard her because she found those three faces in the fifth row and pressed her hand flat against her chest. She and Gideon were not friends, exactly, not family exactly, but they were something. They talked once a month. June drew her a picture and mailed it, a different subject every time, horses and dragons, and once a wren. June still kept the original drawing, the blood angel, except it wasn't under a pillow anymore. It hung framed on the wall of Yvette's apartment, next to a photograph of Earline on a porch in South Carolina in 1969, in a coat she'd bought herself. Gideon had quietly pulled Marsh Capital's money out of every staffing roll-up. It touched the same quarter he learned where it had been. He never put out a statement about it. Some changes don't need a press release. Yvette looked down at her hands as she walked off the stage. The same hands that had mopped floors at midnight, that had scrubbed blood and worse off the linoleum for $16 an hour, that had opened a vein 24 times so a stranger's child could keep breathing, that had braided her grandmother's hair when her grandmother could no longer lift her own arms. Those hands were going to hold a stethoscope now. They were going to hold the hands of frightened children in the dark, professionally this time, and get paid an honest wage for it. But they were never, not for one single day, going to forget where they had been. Let me step out from behind the story for a minute, before you scroll. I want to be straight with you about what's real in this and what isn't. Yvette isn't real. Gideon isn't real. June, Earline, Roland Keck, St. Bridget's, Meridian, none of them are real. I made them up to carry something true on their backs. But a few of the things they carried are as real as the chair you're sitting in, and I put them there on purpose. Warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia is real. In the medical books it sits under code D5911. It's a condition where the body's own immune system turns on its red blood cells and destroys them. For some patients, especially the ones who've built up extra antibodies over years of transfusions, finding compatible blood gets genuinely, frighteningly hard. The blood bank phrase, least incompatible, is real, and it is exactly as unsettling as it sounds. There are children alive right now who depend on a small number of rare, antigen-matched donors most of us will never meet. If that moved you, the most useful thing in the whole world you could do is give blood, and keep giving it. The American Red Cross, or your local blood center, can tell you your type, and whether you happen to be one of the rare ones. You might be the only match for somebody's June. The second thing is wage theft, and that one's real too, and bigger than most people think. Shaving minutes off time cards, rounding overtime down to nothing, ghost names on a payroll, leaning on the workers least able to fight back. It happens in hospitals, nursing homes, warehouses, restaurants, all over this country, and it adds up to billions of dollars a year, taken out of the checks of people who are already running their math with a coffee cup, bailing out the boat. If it's ever happened to you, the Department of Labor's wage and hour division is real, and you can file a complaint, and you don't need a billionaire to do it. Most people who do it have nobody important in their corner. They do it anyway. The third thing isn't a statistic. It's the janitor. Because here is the part I most wanted you to sit with. The The most important person in June's medical life, for 2 years, was a woman that everyone in that building walked past without seeing. And I don't think that's a fantasy. I think there are people exactly like that in your life this week. They mop the floors of your hospitals. They drive the bus your kids ride. They stock the shelves at 3 in the morning. They wipe your grandmother's chin in the home you can't visit as often as you mean to. They give everything they have, and most of us never learn their names. Keck is invented, but the thing he believed is not. He believed certain people could be skimmed and squeezed because nobody important would ever come asking about them. A lot of the cruelty in the world runs on exactly that bet. The bet that the small and the tired and the poor are safe to step on because who's going to come? And the answer this story gives, the only answer I really believe in, is that you never actually know who's going to come. You never know which invisible woman on the night crew is the one keeping the whole thing standing, so you might as well treat all of them like she is, because she is. Every one of them is holding up some piece of the world with her bare hands, and the world hardly ever stops to say thank you. I'll say it here, for whatever it's worth. If you're a Yvette, if you're the one in your family or your job who shows up when nobody else will, the one who gives the realest part of herself and asks for nothing back, I see you. Your grandmother is watching. You don't get tired in private for nothing. The story ends with a graduation, and a villain ruined, and a little girl in remission, and I know it's a little neat. Real life isn't always this neat. I wrote it this neat anyway, because sometimes you need to watch the right person win, and the dignity that got stolen get handed back, even if it's only in a made-up hospital on a made-up street. Stories don't fix anything. They just remind you that some endings are possible. So tell me, when's the last time you gave blood? And when's the last time you really stopped and learned the name of someone you walk past every day? Leave it in the comments. I read them, all of them. Take care of each other out there.